Good afternoon, everyone. This is Keith Broders, your host on the Friends of Liberty Radio Network. We are very delighted that we are going to have a new feature in our weekly program. We are going to be working with Byron Dale, and his radio show is going to be called the WealthMoney radio show. And Byron Dale is going to be the host of that show. And so without any further ado, I would like to turn the time over to Byron to let him kick off his inaugural Wealth Money radio show. So, Byron, welcome aboard.
Well, thank you, Keith, and I'm a little new to this, so if I make a few little stumbles tonight, well, don't get too excited. But I'm glad to have a guest tonight, Terry Kemet, who I've recently met, and a very interesting young fellow that has quite a little bit to say, and I think I'll just bring him on now, and we'll start with him, let him start, and then I'll ask a few questions, and we'll just kind of let the ball roll as it does.
Okay, Byron. Yeah, this is Terry Kemet. I'm from Tappan, North Dakota, a little town just out in the middle of North Dakota, just 200 people, counting the dogs and cats.
All the oil,
No oil. No oil. I have an opinion about that, too, but we're going to save that for another show sometime, I'm sure. But
Go ahead.
A friend, Gene Paulson, and myself attended a law class 12 years ago, and before that, even we were doing things that we would a group of us, patriot-minded people, would get together and we talk about health issues and legal issues, and we set up things like grand juries. And we call them common law courts. We don't like to use those terms anymore because it seems that people that call it common law get in trouble. And so a couple of years ago, my friend was having trouble. Gene was having. He lives in northern South Dakota. Attended law class with me, and he says, these son of a guns. He said, they're just doing illegal stuff here, and they're trying to take my property. And he had a $10 million organic export business, and they were just, the big boys didn't like him there. And,
well, of course they didn't.
No, so they just tried to basically break him, and they said, you should sell to us, and he didn't really want to sell. It was his choice not to, and of course looking back, he thought maybe he should have done that, but. What happens, the big boys jump up on you, gang up on you, and then, of course, he knew the law, and he would go in and he'd beat on him a little bit, and he'd win. He'd win some cases, and he said, well, this ain't hard at all. And then all of a sudden, the court system says, we can't let this guy win.
That's right.
This ain't right. Right doesn't mean anything.
It's all about power.
It's all about power. It's all about money. Exactly.
And I want to interrupt here just a second because I have worked on legislation in Minnesota for quite some time. In fact, 17 years trying to push one law. And you'd go to a lot of hearings in the process, while you was down there waiting to see somebody. And these people would come in and talk about how they started good business, and then it got in, and pretty quick they got an offer they just couldn't refuse. And and that's one of their way they do things. If somebody starts something that's really good, then they take it over, and if it's too much competition against them, then they just buy it out and shut it down. And that's what your friends run into. Go ahead and just continue on, because I want to hear what you got to say, probably more than most of the people listening do.
Well, this is how this kind of came about, and we've gone to several states with this now. But it was a couple of years ago. Gene called me, and of course the court system was beating up on him. And this man is like 76 years old. He's not a young guy anymore. He just don't have time to do this stuff anymore. I mean, as far as doing the physical work out there in the plant and stuff that he was doing, and anyway, they came and through a railroad property that he was supposed to be 2 feet or 5 feet over on this railroad property. They took all his stuff, and the banks were involved, and of course credit cards are involved, and this other guy was involved with the railroad, and And he called me one day and he said, you know, we have a right to avoid a judgment. And, you know, he's done some work on it. He's a good researcher, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever I do is because of what Gene has already done. He's done the research, and then he gets me involved, and I get excited. And I'm not the best talker in the world, but maybe I enjoy it more than Gene does. So I talk, and he called me up and he says, why don't we void this judgment? And I said, well, how do you do that? He says, look it up on the internet. He says, anybody can void a void judgment that's not legitimate. I said, really? And I looked it up, and by golly, anybody can.
Well, they can try to.
They try to. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's the point of it. And I thought, if anybody can do that, why can't a Seventh Amendment jury do it? Because you see, the Seventh Amendment is in the Bill of Rights, and the Bill of Rights is for the people. If it was designed, those amendments was court, and, the Fifth Amendment, grand jury, the Sixth Amendment, criminal court, the Seventh Amendment, the civil jury. If that was meant to be under the regular court system, they'd have put that right under Article 3 in the Constitution.
Should have.
They should have, but you know they didn't. They put it right under the Bill of Rights, and they wrote it in such plain language. Since it's for the people, it's written for the people. Lawyers have this thing, they like to get in there and just beat it up. The root word of attorney is attorney. It's French. It means it's the same word that they use, the derivative is of a tourniquet. Something that twists the life out of something, strangles the lifeblood out of something. And that's what lawyers do. They twist things. And so anyway, we just decided, why can't we do that? So
I want to interrupt you just a second, because I have a friend here in Minneapolis that has researched a lot of that. And if you really look at it, just a small, like 3% or less of the population actually has anything to do at all with the justice system. You know, they're all lawyers, and some are judges, but they're lawyers too. And, you know, you can't run for any of those offices and do any of those unless you are a lawyer. And so he looked up how many of them there were of them compared to the population. It was just unbelievably how small little group control all this. And they're all friends with each other. They're all members of the same club. And you see it if you really pay attention. You go in there. You're the only one that doesn't know everybody once you get in there.
Yeah. Well, I thought about running.
That's what you run into. Go ahead.
I thought about running for district judge here in the last little bit, and I thought that was a pretty good idea. And then the county commissioners called there. One did. He says, you know, we need a new sheriff. You ought to be our new sheriff. And I said, I think I could do that. But the rest of them were in favor of it. But I'm thinking, why can't we run for a district judge? And I haven't researched all that yet. But if someone's listening and wants to do it, I feel like running, because ain't no way the judge would beat me. I guarantee you. Well, because I have a lot of respect in this county, and in a wider area, even in the county. So. And
you may be able to pull that off in North Dakota. I know in Minnesota, though, right away, if you don't have a law degree, they just say you can't do it.
It's been done in Minnesota.
Well, not recently.
Yeah, not too long ago. It has.
Oh, okay, who?
There's a guy over in, I think, by Ada, Minnesota. It's by the border, and he was a paralegal. He wasn't a lawyer. And he says, "Why can't I run for a judge?" And he did. And by golly, they put up a stink. But he won, and they allowed him to do it, and he's done a good job. I mean, he's still a paralegal, and he's still in the system. We need to get people that are not in the system. You see, the whole point of the Constitution, and I guess this is the major premise we look at, and this is what we deal with when we look at that Constitution. If you boil it down into its essential ingredients, here's what it says. It says, as far as people, it's all about people. There's nothing about protecting the state there. It's all about protecting the people. And as far as people go, when people make a deal, you complete the deal. You honor all your agreements with all your people. That's one premise of the Constitution. The other premise is you don't step on other people's rights. I know there was a guy smoking with me in my pickup one time, but can't stand it. I absolutely can't stand it. And this guy was such a hothead. I'm a well driller, and this was a well driller, and he was a Syrian well driller. And half German, half Syrian. That couldn't be nothing worse than that. And anyway, I liked the guy, but he was nuts. Just absolutely kind of crazy, you know. And he was smoking there, and finally said, Ahmed, I said, you got to put out that cigarette. I said, and he blew up. Never blew up as me before, but he blew up. He said, I got a right to smoke like you got a right not to smoke. And I said, Ahmed, this is a free country. And you got a right to swing your fists wherever you please. But when your fist comes into contact with my nose, your rights stop.
That's right.
Same with that, and it's the same with that damn cigarette.
Yeah, when it gets to where it's smothering me, you got to stop.
That's right. And you see,
that's the thing that most everybody has forgotten. Along with rights comes a lot of responsibility.
Exactly.
But we failed as people to stand up to our responsibility to hold these guys in line. And of course, it's went so long now, and the powers went to the head so bad. It's really tough because they gang up against you.
Yeah.
I had a case one time. Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to say, we still have a moral nation, for the most part. And if people realized that their morality is part of that responsibility, they will honor their responsibilities. I believe they will.
I don't think I agree with you that we have a moral, and we used to probably 34 years ago, but I don't think we have a very moral society anymore. They've so,
well, I'm from North Dakota.
I know you are, and you're more apt to see it out there than you are here. I mean, just recently, the whole state voted down a law to have marriage between just a man and a woman.
Yeah.
And then when the Democrats got in, they passed a law that, men can marry men and women can marry women, and they forget the whole concept of marriage anyway. In the first place, was to protect a child. That always came from that relationship, or most always. I mean, it not 100%, but that was the whole basis of it. A long time ago, we didn't have a lot of rights and didn't own property, and so therefore there had to be somebody there to protect it. To make sure the child was taken care of. Mm-hmm. And they forgot all that because those other relationships, I don't care what you say, they don't get children. And see, again, they talked about having their rights. Well, they had the same rights as everybody did. They had the right to marry somebody of the opposite sex, but what they wanted was a special right to do what's right has never been in the history of the world up to this time considered, acceptable. Not that they say didn't do it, but it wasn't considered an acceptable thing like they have now in most places. That's the only reason I would disagree. But let's kind of get back on just how this Seventh Amendment jury works and how you do it and things like that.
Okay, let's do it. So Gene called and said, we need to set up a jury. And that was right up my alley because we've done this for years. We've many years ago. I'm not saying we did it right or whatever, but we did, and I think we did. As far as that goes, there really are no rules.
No, there isn't.
Some people would say it's a kangaroo court. Well, maybe the kangaroo court's better than the other court.
Well, that's all the other one is.
Yeah, it really is, because the judge just does whatever he wants, and whatever he wants is wrong because he's a lawyer, and his allegiance is not to us; it's to the system.
Let me interrupt you here. We went one time to see a federal attorney in Pierre, South Dakota. And we got into this thing, and of course it was about the money and stuff. And he said, well, it didn't work that way. And I had the law copied down how it was supposed to work. And he said, well, he didn't think that was law anymore. So he rolled back, and he got out his law book, and it was just exactly because I just copied it out the day before. And I said it must have been changed, and he went through and he couldn't find the changes, and then he got mad and threw us out. But in the process of all that, he said that every word that comes out of the mouth of the judge is law. And of course, that's absolutely not true. But see, that's what the law schools have done to these guys, and that's why it's so bad. Is because they have made them believe that they are. In fact, I had one judge one time tell me he was God. And I said, "You're not." And he says, "I am in this courtroom." And I said, "Well, you may be the top guy here, but you're not a god in any sense of the word." And he got so mad he ran out of the courtroom, and then finally he come back. But you know, it's just, this is the thing that the people don't realize, because most people have never been in court unless some traffic ticket or something that they honestly feel they was probably guilty of anyway, so they just pay the fine and go about their lives. They never stop to think about it. And another example, and this is a little off subject, but we'll get back in a minute. You know, a lot of people don't like the income tax. Well, I happened to be listening to a congressional hearing not too long ago, and within 5 minutes, at least 5 of the legislators said, yes, the IRS is a self-assessment, a volunteer self-assessment taxation. Well, now that's what the legislator said it was. But then you can go to, if you don't volunteer, you go to jail. So see how screwed up it is, and how nobody even stops to think about. Those legislators obviously never stopped to think about what they was really saying, and if they did, why aren't they leading the charge to stop people from going to jail? See, the whole concept of government was to check each other, you know, so no one group could get it. And, you know, one of the founding fathers, Madison, I think it was, it said, if one group ever get control of all of it, that's the definition of tyranny. And, of course, that's what we have now. The lawyers run everything. They're the judges, and they're the legislators, and they're the executive branch, and that's it. But let's go on to getting back, you know, because it's easy for us to get off. We're you know, been around a while. But let's get back to how you got this started, and keep going, because I want to hear it.
So we set up a meeting, and we needed at least 16 people, because in addition to the 12 main jury members, and we needed 12. Well, we decided we needed 12. Okay, and that was our decision. And some people say they need more, and some people say they need less. But we that was our thing, and we set up a place, and we set up a time, and we needed 12 for the jurors, and we needed a clerk. That's an essential thing. We needed a recorder. You know, this lends to the legitimacy of what we're doing. You got to have it all recorded, so it's all down, so people can get it at any time. You know, and then we had a justice to kind of carry out some duties, and sometimes we put a bailiff in there, but our courts were not controversial, so we didn't invite the other guys, so we really probably didn't need a bailiff, but we kind of had one anyway to kind of moderate, call things together. You know,
now, how do you select the people, the 12 people or the 15 that you needed? How did you select them?
You know, we feel it really don't matter. We can pick almost anybody. If you look up juries under the Seventh Amendment, just look in the Constitution annotated. And, you know, the Constitution annotated is a thick book because it's got all kinds of annotations about different things and other things. But when you look at a jury, there's like a page and a half, because juries are pretty much what you want them to be. There's not a lot of rules that go along with making a jury. So we could pick anybody. I mean, we had a jury thing in Minnesota where we had about 300 people there, and we said, who wants to be a jury guy? And God, we got 40, 50 people, and we picked from that. And of all things, we got 2 guys on there that were bankers. Now we were dealing with void mortgages on foreclosures, and let me talk about that when I got it in my head. We've done these in 10 states, and we tell people, okay, you got a problem, you're losing your house, bring the summons and the complaint. We're interested in the complaint. The complaint has to show, if it's a contractual thing between you and a bank, it has to show at least 4 main areas. 1, a piece of paper. You got to have a piece of paper, which is your contract. Number 2, it's got to be signed by you and the bank. Banks never sign your promissory note.
No, never sign anything.
No, they don't. Number 3, they got to prove they put money in the thing. I mean, that's part of the. If you put a complaint out there, you're going to say, "Well, I put money in this, and that guy's got it."
Well, of course, now again, what's the definition of money?
Well, yeah.
And see, but what in our country, dollars are supposed to be money. But
right.
again, if you ask them, and I've done that, to define to me exactly what a dollar is, and nobody knows. Judges don't know. Policemen don't know.
It's an
Nobody
IOU.
knows. No, it isn't. There's nothing in any laws or anything that declares a dollar to be an IOU.
Okay.
That's a farce. Money has never been debt up until just the last couple hundred years when the bankers really got solid control. Money always in barter system and everything represented, a payment, a final payment. You didn't have to pay again. I mean, once you'd made the deal, it was done. You didn't have to go back and get paid and be paid again. And see, that's the difference between credit, because credit is never actual payment. It's the definition of credit in the dictionary is the right to extend time to pay. Well, they can't extend you credit and you use it as a payment because somebody has never paid anything.
Well, see, that's why they made HJR 192, House Joint Resolution 192 in 1933, because they realized that, and they realized this fiat money will not pay a debt.
Yeah, but see, we don't use fiat money anymore. Because you got to understand, if you look up the definition of fiat in the dictionary, it says that which is declared money by law. And what we use today for most of all of our money, and in fact 100% of it's created that way, is just bank credit. And there's nothing, any law that declares bank credit to be money.
Yeah.
There's no laws that says that. There's no law that says it's a dollar either. And see, people get all wound up in this fiat stuff, but see, that's nonsense too, because gold was fiat, because if it wasn't, they wouldn't have needed to weigh it and asset and coin it into money. And of course, what they did was they monetized the gold, which was an evidence of wealth. But today, the bankers monetize debt. In other words, they use your assets for the value and determine the value and how much you want. Then they put your assets on their books as an asset to them, and then they give you a credit, which is a liability to them, and then claim it's an asset to you, and you go out and spend it. But see, it's something that actually was just extended the right not to pay. But nobody thinks about these things. Most people never really look up words in dictionaries, and they kind of make up their own definitions lots of times. And so this is the whole problem. So again, see, this is the problem. We can't keep all these things straight, most people. So, when you talk about did he put up money, well, what is the definition? You need to ask him, well, did you put any dollars in? Then you can ask for a direct definition of the dollar. Because there was one in law, but everybody says it doesn't exist. But I could never find out where it was appealed or even changed, even amended. But go ahead with your story. I didn't want to interrupt you. I just wanted to, make a couple points.
Yeah, nowadays all we can do is charge debt. We can't pay it, but that's legal now. So.
Well, but it's not. There's no place there that says it's legal. There's no law that says that a debt is money or can be used as a medium exchange. It's all a fiction that they've made us believe. But it's never been based on anything that was factual. In fact, the banks have the power to create money, they say, but there is no law or any place that says that. The Constitution says Congress has the authority to create money. They use the word coin, but use coin as a verb, and it means to create. And that's what they did when they created money by monetizing it. They took and weighed an asset and now declared a certain weight of that gold and a certain purity was money. The gold itself was never money. It only became money because the law said that they was going to do that and make it money. But there's no law that says any of these other things qualify. And, of course, nobody goes by that law. And they say, we don't do that anymore. Well, then what do you do? And, again, that's kind of off the story. But let's go back in and go ahead with how you selected the jury and had the two bankers.
Make it up as they go. But anyway, okay, and the last point, that has to be two signatures.
You're breaking up a little.
I better move on here. Evidence that money had changed hands. Of course, it has. And then the fourth thing is, where did the money come from? If there was money, where did it come from? And if those four things, if one of them's missing, they have no standing to bring the case to court. And if they have no standing, a judge can't reach out with jurisdiction. And when the judge does, they always do. And when the judge does reach out with jurisdiction and say, well, we're going to handle this case, and we're going to take this stuff away from these people and give it back, the money back to the bank where it belongs. Well, all of a sudden, that's judicial fraud because they have no jurisdiction. Yeah. So, and once in a while, we'll actually convene a Fifth Amendment grand jury and indict the judge. But
now,
anyway,
how did it come out when you had the two bankers on the jury? How did that come out? Did you get a hung jury, or did you? No,
I explained it to the point where the bankers finally figured out that they actually didn't loan them any money. I always said if I had a banker's mother that was sitting on in the jury, she'd convict her son because we have it on black and white, you know, and that's why we want to get in the past. We never invited the FBI or the federal marshals or the sheriff. Well, we've had sheriffs in our juries, yeah, and they were always good. This was years ago, and but now I think what we need to do is get the marshals involved, the FBI involved. Matter of fact, I just had an FBI guy come down here a couple of months ago, and that was almost scary. You know, when you got the sheriff driving around the country out here looking for me, asking everybody where I am with a guy following with a black van and black windows, that doesn't bode very good for
scares all the neighbors, I guarantee you.
Oh, yeah. The neighbors were more scared than I was, and I said, well, that's kind of a problem. I said, what's the deal? They didn't know. Anyway, I found out that it was an FBI guy, and I said, well, come on now. I made some peach dessert, and I fed it to him, and I told him, I said, what do you all need to know? I'm, open book, whatever you need. And he says, well, what about these jury things? And I said, the interesting thing about it, I said, we're just doing what it says we can do in the Seventh Amendment to the Bill of Rights. And I said, our attempt to use the Constitution, you can't take that attempt and turn it into a crime. And he looked at me, and he smiled, and he nodded, and he says, you're absolutely right. And, I told him in the past, and he was wondering about these big judgments we put out and things like that. And I says, well, we just do the same thing the court does, but we just use the same criteria. Matter of fact, we make it in a format so the court people can kind of understand it, because we want them to kind of pass judgment on it too. However, they can't stand it. I mean,
of course
really
not. You're taking a hold in some of their power, and they ain't about to give up that power. They know how powerful they are, or at least think they're that powerful.
That's exactly right.
And I think now would be a good time to work with, sheriffs. Sheriff Mack has got a lot of people really thinking about this, and the sheriff really is the most powerful man in the county.
Yes, he is.
If it comes right down to it,
they've all been perverted. They don't understand the Constitution. So, I try to teach them. And when I get a new guy, then we do teach them. We let them know how what their oath means. It's about those two things.
Most of them don't even understand, because I talked to a sheriff a long time ago in North Dakota, and he said the state's attorney was his boss. And I said, well, pardon me, but you don't have a boss. You're elected by the people. You don't have a boss.
Yeah, that's right.
And he said, the state's attorney is my legal advisor, and I have to pay attention to what he says. And, of course, that's not true either.
No.
But, see, this is what this false education has done to us.
Exactly.
Because, see, even the guy that was running for sheriff and got elected, obviously he did not understand what his job was. His job wasn't to just be, lunch carrier for the judge and the state's attorney.
Yep.
No, I mean, his job was to uphold the Constitution and protect the people.
That's right. And you see, they've gotten away from protecting the people and gotten into enforcing laws. And most of the laws are unconstitutional, because most of these people go to jail for crimes against the state. What's the state?
True. And absolutely crimes that had no victims.
There's no victims at all. Yeah.
No victims at all. But they,
I mean, how can you hurt
what they do?
How can you hurt a piece of paper?
Well, you can't.
No, not really.
Speeding, for example, I mean, unless you hit somebody or do something, there couldn't be a crime there.
Exactly.
Now, if you cause somebody else damage, of course, then there is a crime.
Yep.
But see, they don't look at it. Just the mere fact that you're going a certain speed, you become a criminal. You go to jail and get fined. And I did that one time. I really wasn't going. I guess I was going about 2 miles an hour above the speed limit. And but they charged me for a lot more, and we went through it all, and we got down, and they finally got down. They kept dropping the fine down because I proved this and proved that and the other. And they said, well, okay, you're clearly not guilty of what we charge you, but you are guilty because you was still 2 miles an hour over the speed limit, not 10 or whatever they charged me with. So we got down, and they went from, I don't know, something like $74 down to $15. And so I said, okay, now I guess I'm willing to go along with that. I don't think it's right because I don't think you can change the charge after I'm proved I'm not guilty of the charge that brought me in here. But the judge said he could. And so then I said, okay, now you're going to fine me $15. Is that correct? And he said, yes. I said, well, if you can tell me what $1 is, I'll do my best to bring it to you. But I just, honest to God, don't know what $1 is. Now, I've been in court, and I've done a lot of things, and I know corn and wheat and cows and hay and silage and several other things are not money, but I've never been able to find out, I mean, not dollars, but I've never been able to find out what $1 is. And they could not tell me. They didn't know what to do. They didn't know where to go.
There's a few countries that have the word dollar written on their currency, and you can. There's a country in South America. I remember we went down there. Or a friend of mine went down there and got, I think, $300,000 worth of their money. Of course, it cost him about $100. And he went and paid his mortgage with that. And you see, once they accept that, if you tender it and they accept it, they're done. You know.
That would be, well, there's a court case that I have a copy of it that a guy was challenging this in Michigan, I think, Detroit, I think, but I'm not positive anymore. And they got down to it, and they kept wanting to know what $1 was, and the judge says, well, I don't know, I don't care. I don't care what you pay, and you can pay in beans, but you're going to pay. And then the prosecutor jumped up and, oh, my God. And the guy said, okay. So then he brought him that many beans, and that was the end of it.
Yep.
And they never took it any further.
Yep.
And I have that court case here someplace, and I've read it. But anyway, so now after you go ahead and have the jury, you then have the guy bring in the complaint, and now you start going through the complaint and see how it jives with an actual true contract.
Yep, whether it's a contract or not. Yeah, we find out whether it's a legitimate contract, and like I say, you have to have those 4 points. If it's a contract, you got to have at least your word, or someone's word that whether it's written or not, and you got to have money change hands, and you got to have full disclosure. And full disclosure means they got to tell you everything. If they didn't tell you everything, it's fraud.
Yeah.
So, And of course, all the contracts with banks are fraud.
Oh, absolutely, because they never sign them. They don't actually tender you anything.
So we avoided the mortgage, and our two bankers, we talked at length. They would call me aside and they say, but, and I said, but you never loaned them any money, and I got them to believe it.
Well, it's true. I mean, again, what is the definition of money?
Yeah.
Because credit cannot possibly be money, because money at the very least must be a final payment. Otherwise, what's the sense of doing it?
Yeah,
I mean, what's the sense of tendering you payment if you have to go back and pay him something later?
And you see, there's federal laws against banks loaning their credit. There's federal laws.
I know, but nobody pays any attention to that either.
But if they wrote them laws, they can get kind of serious about that. And so I think we should do that. You see, and this is a part of the ammunition that we can use to wake people up. The whole point of what we're doing is to wake people up. We know we're not going to get a whole lot of stuff accomplished, but eventually we will.
Well, if you get enough people that they actually demand change, change will come.
Yeah.
But right now, we really don't have anybody demanding. They're demanding liberty, but they don't have a clue what they want.
Right.
They don't have a clue what that liberty means. And, of course, honestly, you can't have true liberty if you're forced to borrow your medium exchange and pay interest on it.
Exactly.
Even just to borrow it,
Exactly.
and, to be forced into debt, just to have a medium exchange to go out and do business is slavery on its face. I mean, it is no way that you could be freedom and have liberty and have our kind of money system.
Yeah, well, just the fact you send in a 1040. I mean, just read the Fifth Amendment. It says that you have a right to be secure in your person and papers, and you have a right not to testify against yourself. When you sign that 1040 form, you just testified against yourself.
Well, not only that. I mean, I was in court one time, and it just so happened I knew the marshal quite well. I'm not going to get into that all right here, but it's quite a story in itself. And so I walked through the metal detector, and I said, I'll do that. But the Constitution is just really flat out clear that you can't go through my papers without a search warrant. And so, the judge is not over 150 feet away at the most. Go get a search warrant, and you can look through it. We both know there's nothing in there but just papers I have for this court hearing. But and he turned and said, well, Byron, I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to walk away. But they'll just send another marshal out that will. And I said, I understand that. That's probably the way it'll work. But I just want to see if anybody in this legal system cares anything about the Constitution. And so a few minutes later, another marshal come out, and, of course, they handcuffed me and leg cuffed me and took me into the courtroom. And that's the way I was the whole time I was in there. And then, of course, I raised thunder, and then later the judge sent me, I'm sure I've got it here someplace if I can find it, he quoted a court case where they had overruled that now, and that didn't apply that when you came to court.
Oh, yeah.
And see, this is really the problem, because, our Constitution is alive and well, except the legal system and the government in no way care. The power has gone to their head, and they're going to run the thing the way they want to. And they don't care what the Constitution says, because we have never made sure that we had some way to enforce it. And to me, that's one of the things that was really wrong with the Constitution. I read a book the other day on it, and they said, well, they finally decided that they couldn't have just the people doing it. That'd be too much trouble. So they'd have the judge, the government itself decide that. Well, that right there, you knew the thing was going to go bad. Whenever you let a man police himself, obviously you're not going to get any policing done. And they should have left a way that we, the people, either through these grand juries or juries or anything, there should have been. And one time I sued Dole when he was in big shot in the government on a redress for grievance, and his lawyer answered, well, you clearly have that right, but we have no obligation whatsoever to listen to you. Well, if they have no obligation to listen, then you have no right to redress.
Right, exactly.
And we've got to understand these things, and more of us have got to understand these things and talk to them. And unlike most people, I don't just write about it. I've actually tried all these things that I talk about. I've been in court over them, and I've been personal experiences over them, and other things. And I've had lots of people I knew that pushed big theories and never had once had used it or tried it themselves, but they was really great in selling how it would work to you.
Yeah, well,
and our whole so-called patriot movement is full of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But you check on most of them has never actually done it themselves.
No.
And a few probably have, but most of them haven't.
Well, you see the point. The point of our exercise is this: if I can get two bankers on a jury to agree that they never loaned these people any money, and vote with the other 10, that the judgment is void. Why can't we get the FBI and the federal marshals and the sheriffs and the Lord knows who? I mean, we're inviting everybody from now on. And,
I think we have a chance to do it if you do it like you're doing, and go to them and have them come, and then go to them and tell them that you want their help to enforce it. Because theoretically, and I read quite an article that a woman wrote one time about that, and she said that was one of the reasons they didn't like the common law jury stuff, was because it brought up the fact that inherently the judicial system has no enforcement powers. The Constitution left that all up to the executive branch.
Yep.
And that was part of the check and balances. But of course now, and I've had marshals tell me, well, their job was to do exactly what the judge told them to do. And of course, see, that's not their job, because they're an executive branch and he's an judicial branch, and they're supposed to be check on each other. And therefore, they should be a check on the judges, not just go along and do every crooked thing that they want done. It's
all about that oath they took, and then they have to be led to understand that oath is not. They didn't vow to protect the state. They vowed to protect the people. And you see, if we can get the mindset back where it needs to be, I think we're going to have enough honest people in the executive, marshals, sheriffs, whatever. They're going to either quit or they're going to do what's the right thing.
Well, we've had them quit too. One time I was in a hearing in Bison, South Dakota, and the law at that time said that if you wasn't registered with the Secretary of State, to do a business, if you come from outside of the state, and that, like Production Credit Association, they're not there for. And if they're not registered with the Secretary of State, they can't maintain an action in court.
Right.
And so this woman was arguing that, a friend of mine, his wife, and I knew them both well, and she was doing an excellent job. And the judge, when he first started, he was setting up real high and straight, and and you could see clear down to almost his belly button, above the bench. Well, the longer she went, the more he slid down and down and down, till finally you could just barely see his head.
Yeah.
And I just happened to be sitting beside the sheriff. So I nudged him, and I said, "Look at that judge." And he looked, and so then she finally wore out and gave up, and she sat down, and then the prosecutor started in, and of course he said, "Oh, that didn't make any difference," and blah, blah, blah. And pretty quick the judge was sitting back up where he was, and I poked the sheriff again, and I said, "Now look at that judge." And the next week he quit. He resigned. And what he should have done was arrested the judge.
Should have done it. Exactly.
Yeah, that's what he should have done, because that was his job. It was clear to him and clear to everybody who was paying attention that judge was in the wrong, and knew he was in the wrong, because he just couldn't handle it. He just kept slunking down and more.
Right.
But when she finally gave up, and then of course away he went again, just like he was. And these are things that people just they've never experienced this stuff. They've never really done a lot of this stuff. They just wrote about it, and we need to get people to understand that these guys are power hungry, and they think they've got it. And the old saying is, "Power corrupts, and total power corrupts totally." And that's where we are in this nation. And we've got to quit looking for excuses why you made a mistake or something else. And a lot of this, the whole thing is what they did wrong and the judge didn't rule with them. Well, no, that isn't the case. Why they didn't rule with them is because they're as corrupt as you can get. And they are corrupt, and you've got to call it corruption, and then name it for what it is, and then go do something about it, not just say, "Well, I made a mistake, I didn't do something right." And that's another, thing that they've kind of educated us into believing that, well, it must have been our fault. The judge really isn't that bad.
Byron, let me just bring something up that I think kind of interesting. Samuel Adams, I take it back. It was John Adams who basically said that there's two ways to make a man or a nation a slave. One way is to conquer them with the sword, and the other way is to loan them money. And one of the things that I find very interesting about the circumstances that we find ourselves in, that is that in the olden days, the kings used to employ armies of knights or soldiers to fight for them on the battlefield. But as we have progressed into a more civilized society, instead of having soldiers battling on the battlefield, we now have lawyers battling in the courtrooms. And the lawyers essentially are taking the place of the soldiers in the battlefield. And they basically, their job is to take the law, which was designed to protect the life, liberty, and property of the people, and now the lawyer's job is to change and twist the law in order to pervert the law, in order that it might benefit the few at the expense of the many.
And you see that so often. In fact, there's a court case going on right now in Minneapolis where a guy's accused of murdering his wife. And he may or may not, I don't know. But I've listened enough to know the case that they had absolutely no evidence to prove that. All they're going on is the prosecutor's theory of what happened. But they have absolutely not a single bit of evidence to back up his story. And now it's went to the jury, and they're having a hard time deciding what to do. But see, this is, again, we've got away from the fact that these guys have actually really got to prove their case. It is not an emotional thing. It's not just because somebody got hurt and somebody's got to pay. The idea and the whole concept with juries was to protect the innocent as well as, to punish the guilty. And nowadays, most juries just find anybody guilty that they charge. They never really see, well, is this possible that what this prosecutor is saying is true? And you see it so many times. In fact, a long time ago in South Dakota, they had a case where a house burned down and the guy's wife got killed, and I think a child or two. And they investigated it pretty thoroughly and decided he didn't have nothing to do with it. Well, the woman's father had a lot of influence, and pretty quick they investigated him again. And that case, one of the marshals says on the stand, well, it's not matters what really happened. It matters what we can make you believe that happened. And see, that again is the corruption that snuck in because these people want power, and they want to have their own way, and they want to find somebody guilty, and they don't care whether it's the right one or not, because many times it's hard to determine which is the right one, really, by factual evidence. Sometimes it isn't. And these are all things that we've got to think about and get back to it. And, of course, you've got to always come back. If you want to know what's really wrong, follow the money. And, of course, this all comes because of the shortage of money, and everybody's trying to get more money. And, again, I've thought about this several times in the last days after having my first conversation with Terry. You'd think the courts would welcome these seventh amendment juries because they're always complaining they don't have enough funds and they're too overloaded and they can't get the jobs all done. But see, what they hate worse than anything else is for people to take away their power. They really think they're powerful in there. I had a judge tell me he could do anything and he could enforce it against anybody because if he had to, he'd get the United States Army out there to enforce what he ruled. And see, that's not the way it's supposed to work at all. Never was designed to work that way. So, well, let's get back in. And so now when you go out, you just kind of go to a neighborhood where there's a bunch, and then, like you said, you just kind of selected them from who showed up at the meeting. You advertised the meeting, and who showed up, you just select the juries from there.
We've got Gene did an excellent job of research, legal research on this stuff. And he put out the jury rules, how we're supposed to act, and then I've got about 15, 18 documents that we put out. The second one is the most important of all. We call it the presentment and declaration. It provides the legal basis for us doing what we do. And in that presentment, Scalia was the last guy in the Supreme Court, 1992. It's called U.S. versus Williams. And Scalia says in there that he's talking about the grand jury now, so you got to get the juries separated, but we feel they're all the same because they're all in the Bill of Rights and one's like the other. But he was talking about the grand jury, and in that he says the grand jury can operate autonomously, basically on their own. They don't have to deal with the judge. He says frequently the judge will call a grand jury, but in this case, the judges are the problems. They're not going to ever call a grand jury on themselves. So we call it on them, you see, and the prosecutor's in bed with them. And of course, there's federal law that says if you know that there's wrongdoing amongst your group, and you can see it, and you don't tell on them people, you participate in it. You're a collaborator to it. It's a RICO violation, and you all go to jail. They're all scared. Yeah, they're all scared.
That makes me think of a story it's personal. When I was kind of battling this money years ago, the governor sent 42 cops out to take everything I had, and they didn't have any warrants or anything to do anything. No warrants for arrest, no judgments to take what I was taking. They served some papers on me, but they didn't even leave in the county, so the actual service wasn't legal. But we were sitting there at the kitchen table talking, kind of like what we are, and all of a sudden one of them grabbed a 32-ounce ketchup bottle off the table and hit me over the head and knocked me plumb out of my chair. And And they got me on me and beat me up and beat the snot out of me, put me in the hospital for 7 days. And when my wife and mother first got there, they both said they wouldn't have recognized me if they hadn't knew who I was. But anyway, a week or two later, when I got probably 3 weeks or more, when I got to feeling better, I went to see the state's attorney in the county I lived in. I said, I would like to know what the definition of assault is. And he said, Byron, there's no question about whether you assaulted in your home the other day. I said, well, then I want to press charges. And he said, well, I'm not going to do that because I was in on the planning of it all. So if I press charges again, I'd have to press charges against myself, and there's no way I'm going to do that. And see, there you get where you've all now lost it, where they're all in the same club, all in the same group together, and they're not going to come against each other. And again, that's where we've lost a lot of this stuff. In fact, when I lived in Rochester one time, I was thinking about this. I called up the clerk of courts, and I said I just personally saw the prosecutor, the state's attorney, commit a crime. How do I report it to? And what do I do something about it? And she said, well, I don't know. I'll study this a little bit and get back to you. And 2 or 3 days later, she called me back, and she said, well, Mr. Dale, I don't know what to tell you or how to tell you, but there is nobody you can report it to but him, because he's the only one that can prosecute it. And I said, do you realize what you're really telling me, that then absolutely he's immune from law? He can do anything. And she said, yeah, I think I do. And then that was the end of the conversation. And, of course, I hadn't actually seen the guy. I just wanted to know what the answers would be. And there again is where we've actually lost it all, because we've let these guys get to where they are the only ones that can prosecute themselves. And if they're part of the club, no, they won't do it. And if you get in and really get the challenge in this, where you make enough press and enough commotion that they actually really come after you, then you will learn all these things firsthand.
Yeah, we did that. We on our way back from a seminar in Chicago, Gene says, let's stop at the federal marshal's office and see if they'll enforce our void judgment. And I'm thinking, are you nuts, Gene? Well, we may walk in, but we may not walk back out. But I said, well, okay, let's do it, So we emptied our pockets of all our fingernail clippers and such, and away we went, and knocked and went up to the 5th floor. And Gene's pretty bold. He went up to the window and he knocked on the window, and the marshal was there. One marshal was there. And he said, what do you want? He said, we just want to find out if the Constitution is valid or not. And I thought, oh, my God.
That sounds like a good one to me.
Well, they all came out. One went in the corner with his hand on his gun, and 2 others stood in front of me, and I'm thinking, fine fix you put me in here, So he said, well, what do you want? And there was a couple other people there with us. And I said, well, here's what we're doing. We're doing juries, 7th Amendment jury. And I explained, I said, the 7th Amendment, gives us the right to, in civil suits and values over $20, we can try a matter, and it says that matter can't be retried except under the rules of common law. And we've done that. We've voided some judgments that was passed out by judges giving banks money, the money that wasn't their money in the first place. And then I told them about the 4 elements of the contract, that we look at all those elements on the complaint, and if any of those elements are missing, they don't have standing to bring a case to court. And so they said, well, what do you want us to do about it? And I said, well, you're the executive branch of government. You enforce these laws. We want you to enforce our void judgment. And that was the big question of the day. And I waited, and I'm thinking, this is not going to be good. and the guy looked at me, and I'll never forget what he said. He said, we don't have a procedure for for that. And I said, oh. I said, you don't have a procedure for that. Well, I said, it doesn't make the Constitution invalid because you don't have a procedure. It just makes it not used. And now he's starting to nod his head. And I explained that, and I said, you guys are the best and brightest in the class to be picked, to be federal marshals. And I said, you know better. You go to court all the time. You see it's a joke. It's a play. And the judges are playing a part. And I said, and he looked at them, and they're nodding their heads up and down. They're just like they're almost begging you. Will someone please, stop the merry-go-round so we can get off, because this ain't right what we're doing. They know it. Mm-hmm. And I told them, I says, we're not on opposite sides. I said, you work for us. You don't work for the courts. Mm-hmm. I said, when you took that oath to the Constitution, you took an oath to us, because the Constitution is designed to protect us. It isn't about protecting the state. It's about protecting the people. And they knew that. They nodded their heads up and down. And then I kind of got on their case quite a bit, and they was almost acting like kids, like they got their hand in the cookie jar and they got caught. Mm-hmm. And finally the guy in the corner says, why are you doing this? I said, I'm doing it so my children and your children can grow up and know what freedom is like. And now he nods his head and he walks over. Now I got them all three in front of me, and we're talking, and we're having a good time. They're learning, they're understanding, and things are going well. And there wasn't a one time that they didn't nod their head in agreement to what we were doing. And it got come time to go, and they said, you should go up and talk to the U.S. Attorney on 7th floor. And I thought, well, this worked so well, I think we will. So we went upstairs, and we knocked on the window there, and frumpy old lady with a long dress came out, and another fellow with a stuffed-up shirt, and I explained the same thing to them. And the first word out of their mouth, we think you need to hire an attorney. I looked at her. I said, ma'am, you don't get it. I said, the attorneys are the problems.
That is the problem.
Exactly, and that's what I told her. And then she says, well, maybe you should talk to your legislator. And I said, we got all the laws we need. We need people like you and the judges to obey them like we have to obey them. I turned around and left.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
I told that to a lawyer. He says, they didn't push the button. I said, we were long gone by the time they reached the button.
Well, of course, now you're getting the ones that's really getting rich off of it. I mean, because they get paid big. I had a banker tell me one time his largest expense was lawyers.
Oh, sure.
And I and another family. It was that same family that I was telling you about, where the woman was doing such a job, and the judge slunk down. Yeah. We called, I think, between the two of us, every lawyer in the state of South Dakota. And we only found two that their biggest clients wasn't some kind of a financial institution.
Yep.
And of course,
works.
That's the way it works. And you can see, that's why the problem is. You can see that the whole problem is. And it don't make a difference. You can argue about anything else, but if you don't to tackle this money and get enough, everybody wants to change that and move in one mass to get it changed. We can get it changed, and we can get it changed peacefully. But we've got to go get at the root of the problem. We can't be talking about every other little thing that really is not going to make any difference in the long run.
Exactly. I told this FBI guy down here, I said, things are getting pretty bad. He says, I know it. And I says, a lot of people say that the only thing that's going to solve this problem is lead. And I said, I agree with them. But I says, I'm hoping it's going to be the lead out of my pencil.
Yeah.
Because that's the one I think we can win.
Well, they used to tell us the pen was mightier than the sword. I don't know if it is or not, but that's what we got to hope for.
Well, I think it is. Well, it's the pen that they've been using to make us slaves.
Yeah, they backed it up with pretty good force. Like my wife was telling me today, I didn't hear it. That yesterday, some congressman went down and opened up the monument down there in Washington, D.C., so the veterans could get in. But today, Obama sent, I don't remember the figure, it was 20-some officers down there. It was more than they had over there protecting the embassy in Benghazi. to make sure that didn't happen again, that they stayed out of it.
Yeah. Isn't it a sad state of affairs? Yeah.
I mean, here the government's supposed to be shut down, but they still got all the cops to stop people from actually going there to the monument. I mean, how can that thing? How could the government being shut down have anything to do with people walking down and look at that thing?
Yeah, well, like my old friend, old GJ used to always say, it's just a damn good thing we don't get all the government we pay for.
I think we do more. But I think the bankers do get all the government they pay for.
Oh, yeah, they do. They do, but they're the only ones. Yeah,
they're the only ones. The rest of us don't. We don't get any benefit at all.
That's exactly
so how
true.
often do you have these
well,
Seventh
we're changing our mode a little bit. Gene was kind of a little frustrated because we weren't getting any enforcement. So I said,
it's tough.
It is. And I said, well, what we need to do, I said, is change a little bit. We have to adapt. We have to kind of see which works and go that way. We know that juries are making right decisions, but if no one knows but us and the judge, it's not going to work.
That's right.
And then to go to the federal marshals later and say, here's what we did, enforce these. Wouldn't it be better to have them in on the ground floor?
Oh, I think it would. I like that really well, and the sheriffs too. I think you ought to, if you're going to have a bailiff there, it should be the sheriff.
Maybe so.
I mean, that's his job.
It kind of is his job, yeah.
Well, sure, it's his job.
Sure.
I mean, if there's a problem, he's supposed to. I mean, of course, they used to be peace officers. Now they're law enforcement officers, and there's a wheel of a lot of difference. But
yes,
I think that, not that I know a lot about it, but I think that's one of the things you need to do is make it a real strong thing to get marshals and sheriffs and people like that in on the meeting so they hear all this too and see.
Well, like I told us, FBI guys,
really get, not what somebody else is telling them how bad you guys are, and not trying to force it yourself, but go to the actual sheriff that you elect.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the guy that's supposed to take care of this stuff in his county. And put pressure on him, and if you don't do it, elect one that will.
Well, the thing about it is, this is how this can snowball. We can get the sheriff to do that, and then we can go and we can say, okay, this judge or this elected official has been indicted or a presentment made against him by a grand jury. You need to go arrest him.
And if you can't, if you're scared to do it, get a posse, and we'll all go with you.
Yeah,
but really, as a posse of that sheriff who's legally elected in that county to do that job.
That's right. That's what.
See, this is where I think we made the mistake. I've heard these guys say, "Well, we'll get our own sheriff." No, I don't think the sheriff. In some cases, they are also the problem. In Minneapolis, that's clearly the truth. He's just a big political hack, and because I went and explained this all to him, and the next time I happened to run into him, he couldn't even look at me. He wanted to get away just as fast as he could. And it was, so we know that there's some, but there's a lot of good sheriffs, and especially with Sheriff Mack going out and doing the work he's doing, there's starting to be more and more of them come out. And if you can do that and get some of them to enforce it, now you got a real thing going. Because now they got to come the law against the law.
Yep.
And see, and if it gets right down to it, and of course in South Dakota, I met the sheriff one time, knew him, where the federal marshals come in and threw him in jail. But see, they really did not have the jurisdiction to do that. I mean,
not at all.
They don't, because if you really study the jurisdiction, the federal government only has jurisdiction on property owned by the federal government, or the 10 square miles of Washington D.C.
Matt Dillon was the king in Kansas territory, but when Kansas became a state, he was the king in the post office. That's about it.
And that's the way it's really supposed to be.
Well,
we're not in territories anymore.
No, we're not. And then when the FBI came out here, they asked the sheriff because they knew they were out of their jurisdiction.
And that's the way it ought to be.
Yep.
And if we get these sheriffs to understand that, we have a real chance to make a difference.
We do. We really do. And it's through education and talking to these people like they're on our side. They're not on this other side. And
they should be, because their kids are going to want freedom too.
That's right. And they'll get to realize that once it's presented properly to them, they will.
And their kids might like to own a house someday and a car too, and not just have it be run by some corporation that they get to drive it once in a while.
Yep, that's right. you know, the system's heading for a major disaster. And unless the people wake up, it's going to keep going. You know, it's going to go downhill. But I think we can wake the people up. It's time now.
Well, and you've got a lot better chance to do it in some of these smaller populated places than you do like in Minneapolis. I mean, Minnesota cannot elect a statewide people except Democrats. Now, once you get out of Minneapolis, the greater Minneapolis area, then a lot of Republicans get in. But when it comes right down to it, you know, they did have a governor for a while, but the last election, not a single state officer got elected that was a Republican. Because, you know, now most of the people down here either on welfare, work for the government, or either state or federal or county. Yeah. And they're not going to bucket.
Well, what did they say? Is it 47% now? And what did Thomas and Jefferson say? This thing will go until people find themselves that they got the power to vote themselves money out of the public treasury.
Well, and that's what they're doing.
They know that. They know that. But we've got to wake these people up.
And, of course, nowadays the public treasury is unlimited because the bankers are putting up all the money and you know, they scream about we're being bankrupt, you know, and the federal government and all that. Well, you're never bankrupt as long as you can get another loan, and I guarantee these banks are going to loan the government.
If anybody's listening, there's one good treatise that's out on the internet, and it's called "I Want the Earth Plus 5%." And that's a good place to start because I want the Earth plus 5%. Just punch that into your browser. Comes up in movie form, it comes up in treatise form, and it's just a little 20-minute thing. It's made for like sixth grade level, but believe me, once you go through that, you'll understand what's going on, and then you can get smarter. And
we've got to get that, but we've got so many people. I've got 2 supposedly constitutional lawyers that I've been trying to email. On the first one, I asked him a question about the amendments, you know, that somebody had proposed, and he sent me right back. But now I've asked him a couple other questions, and they won't reply at all. So don't tell me they're on our side, even though they're saying they are.
You got to remember when
big statements they are.
When they get in the bar association, they all of a sudden become, their allegiance is not to you, it is to the court system. And we've got a lot of things we can do against those attorneys. You know, they really need to behave themselves.
Well, you know, they say that, you know, they'll come after you for practicing law without a license, but not a single lawyer has a license to practice law.
The
way they get admitted into a court is they have to go before the judge with another lawyer and say how good he is and how moral he is and a lot of other things that probably isn't true. And then the judge says, okay, I'll admit you to practice before this court. And see, when your whole livelihood depends on being on the right side of the judge, what would you really expect?
Yeah, and here's another thing. I believe all judges in every state, and this is all has to be public record because all public things have to be open records. All we have to do is go into the courts and the clerk and say, I haven't done this yet, but I know people have done it in Nebraska. And you say, where on all these fines? A fine's just another tax. Because people just walk in, they don't even try to they just pay it. You know, they don't even defend themselves anymore. And if you go into the court system and say, I want when these fines are levied, I want what percentage goes to the state, what percentage goes to the judge's retirement account, and da-da-da-da-da. And if something goes to the judge's retirement account, guess what? He has a definite conflict of interest, and all those fines and all those judgments are invalid. They're void because of the conflict of interest.
Yeah, I would dispute in the traffic ticket, as I told you about a little while ago, and one of the things I said, well, where does all this fine go to? And they admitted it. Part of it went to the Highway Patrolman pension fund. I said, what a racket! What a racket! He can go out and lie and pick somebody up.
I guarantee you'll find the statutory law that says that's illegal.
Well, I don't know. I've never looked for that.
Well, you'll find one in the federal government that says it's illegal. It's just flat illegal because it's a conflict of interest.
It should be, at least.
Of course it is.
I mean, he's getting
and they all need to be indicted. Every one needs to be indicted.
Of course they do. But now the question is how in the heck we're going to do it, because like I said, the state's attorney, he openly admitted that I had been assaulted, no question about it. And
we need to get on the radio.
They were the guilty ones, but he was part of it, so he wasn't about to charge any of them.
We need to get on the radio and in the newspapers, and we got to publish our findings. And that's in the legal section, and they have to do it. They have to do it. I'm kind of anxious to get on the radio, although I'm not kind of one of a person who wants to stick my head up and get it lopped off, but I don't see anybody else that knows what's going on, that is in the least willing to do something about it.
Well, that's how I ended up getting beat up and losing $1 million ranch, is because I said, well, somebody ought to do something about this, and I guess I'm somebody.
That's right. You were way before your time, but now more people understand you, Byron. They do. I didn't understand you at the time. I thought, that can't be right, And I kind of had an suspicion in my mind that you were right, but I didn't understand it, you see. And it's that understanding that we need to get. See, I understand that now. I'd be there with you. And other people would be there with us when they understand it. And you put it out in the radio in a simple format that everybody can understand. And my little stories about the bank stuff, everybody can understand it. My banker even understood it.
Well,
he realized he didn't give me any money. I told him, you never gave me any money.
One time I had a couple wanted me to go to their state's attorney in South Dakota, in the southern part of it, and explain all this to him. And so we did, and we went through it for quite a while, and finally said, well, there's no question you're right. But he says, let's face it, it'll be easier to take away you guys' places than it will be to get the judge to follow the law, so I guess that's what we'll continue to do.
That's right. But see, but you see, he knew that. He knew that what they were doing was wrong.
And he did.
But you see, and he did know. But you see, once we need to get out on the radio, and if we can convince 5% of the people, how simple is it? I've talked to people when I go to work to do a job, and I get to talk about my political stuff, and I say, you went to the bank, but you didn't get any money. He says, yeah, I know. And I says, you know? He said, well, sure, they don't give you any money. You just collateralize your own money. And
they don't collateralize your own money. They collateralize your property. But let's face it, it is really the bank's money because they created it, and when you create something, you get to have, it's your right. But the problem of it is, it's done in such an illegal Ponzi scheme and fraud and deception. It's really theft by deception, is what it is.
It is exactly that.
People make the mistake of saying, well, you create the money when you sign your signature. That's not true, because if that was really true, I wouldn't need to go to the bank. I could just sign my signature and do it.
Yeah.
And that doesn't work.
And actually, well, you kind of can't. Well,
no, you can't. Try it and see what you can buy with it.
Yeah.
Now, you might buy it at your local store for a little while, but if you never pay him, he's going to get tired of that after a while.
Well, it's a barter contract, is what it is. I
could
drill a well for a.
That's true, but most people can't do that. They don't have any way to produce anything. You go to a job, you don't produce anything except for the guy you get that pays you.
Yeah.
And you don't have any way to barter that. I mean, not that time. You can barter your weekend time and maybe do something if you're a plumber or a carpenter or somebody like that. If you don't, well then, and you take the bulk of these people out here doing these jobs, like working in these big corporations, not at the upper level. I mean, it's people down there that do the work and wait tables and cook and. They don't have anything to barter with.
That's true. Well, yes, they do. Everybody they have their time.
Well, but time, there are just so many things that time just won't buy, like money does. Pretty hard to go down and barter with your guy at the gas station, especially when the gas station owned by Walmart.
Yeah.
Or Sam's Club, or they're all the same thing, basically. But it's we just have to realize that barter is not an option anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if it ever was, but at one time it was a lot more feasible than it is today. There is nothing wrong with money; it's just the way they use it. Money, at the very least, should represent wealth, not what somebody owes you.
Yes. Yes.
And see, you've got to get that out. And you'd be surprised how many people out there say, well, money is dead. Well, obviously, those people have never really done any looking back or checking, in history, because up until the banks got a hold of it, really in about 1694, that really began to get a real grip on it, and then from then on, spread around the world pretty good. Well, money always represented wealth.
Yeah.
When you barter, you represent wealth.
Mm-hmm.
And you represent what you trade for what you created for somebody else, what he created.
Mm-hmm.
And today you barter with what the bank created by fraud.
That's right.
He didn't give you what he thinks that you did, because what he gave you, and they openly admit it. And I got a copy of the, purpose and function of the Federal Reserve System, and they say right in there, banks buy everything they buy with a promise to pay.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't have to pay because there's nothing to pay with.
Yep,
I personally sued the Federal Reserve Bank of Minnesota for payment on their notes. I had a Federal Reserve note, and before 1963, they all had a promise to pay written on them. In other words, it said right on them, we'll pay X number of dollars. Pardon me. Pay X number of dollars to the bearer on demand.
Yep.
So we sent it down there, and they think, okay, we want the dollars. Now, we don't know what a dollar is, but whatever it is, you just send us the statutory definition of the word dollar, and then I'll accept whatever it is. Whatever it is. I don't care what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, there is no law, so they couldn't do it.
Yep.
And finally, we took that up to the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals, and they said, well, that we dismiss your claim, your case, because you filed a claim for which no relief was available. In other words, they have nothing to pay you with.
Right. Right.
And yet, see, if that's not fraud on its face, there nothing could be fraud on its face.
That's
more than that. And it's fraud that enslaves you, not just does something else, but it actually enslaves you, because I'm not a great Bible guy, but it clearly says that the debtor is always a slave of the lender, servant of the lender.
Mm-hmm.
And if we got to be the debtors, and they're always the lenders, and they don't lend anything but just type numbers on a bank ledger and move it into your checking account ledger. Well, I mean, that's a pretty easy way to get rich. No wonder 1% of the population own 80% of the world's wealth.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think what you need to do is keep going with them, but try to and more to get your sheriffs involved. And especially in the smaller communities where they really do have, and they are a lot more familiar with the people and the people with them. It ain't like in the big cities that all you know is heard of the sheriff. You never ever talked to him, or probably couldn't if you tried.
North Dakota
we
is that
did get
way.
Appointment. What?
The whole state of North Dakota is a small community.
Well, of course it is.
We call it a third-person state. You don't know everybody, but everybody you see knows someone you know.
That's right.
That's right.
I mean, it's not that big a population, and it's not that. Nope. I mean, there's only 2 really big towns in the whole state. 3, I guess. Fargo, Fargo, Bismarck, and what's that one up north?
Grand Forks.
Yeah, Grand Forks. That's really, there's one up there next to North Dakota, or the Canadian border out west. Yeah, Minot's pretty good.
Minot. Yeah.
But that's it, isn't it?
That's it. Yeah.
And they're not really big in any sense of big cities,
No.
And I think if we could get states like, North, South Dakota, Nebraska, Colorado, and all those western states that aren't, we could really get a movement going. And if it only goes once, really goes, and you get some sheriffs enforcing this stuff, this will spread a lot faster. A little success always spreads faster than failure does.
Yeah, that's right. Yep. And like I say, it's an educational effort, and you're talking about putting me on the radio, and I'm a little reluctant, but I think I can explain things to people, and they're mad, and they're looking for answers. And unless they look for answers, they won't find them. But now they're looking. So,
I think more so, and even this last shutdown of the government, it seems to got people more upset than the others have. Mm-hmm. And, of course, the Democrats are trying to make hay out of it, and so is Republicans. But I think the Republicans are using better strategy this time, because they're always trying to slip in, pass this law to fund this, pass this law to fund that, and they don't want to do that because they can see down the road they'll get everything funded except what the Republicans don't want to fund, and then they're not going to do it. And so now it gets to be really which one of them is not trying to get along with the other one.
Mm-hmm.
It's too bad we're not doing this on money instead of, you
yes,
know.
Exactly. They always avert the subject. It's always
Mm-hmm.
about something else. It doesn't mean anything. It's always about the money.
And you know, if you would, if you would actually, get these guys to follow the Constitution, the Congress should be creating the money that you don't have any need to borrow.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean,
They
if you
should
create
spend
your
it
own
into
money, you don't
existence.
have any need to borrow.
Yep.
And
You
I've
just
been
spend it.
down there and watched them run the printing press. I guarantee if I printed money, I wouldn't sell it to you for the cost of printing and borrow it back at face value to spend it.
Well, they should be doing that to us instead of giving it to the Federal Reserve for the cost of printing.
Well, but then,
I
I don't have any problem using it at the face value, but not when you first give it to you give it to somebody else for face value, and then you borrow it. I mean, for the cost of printing, and then you borrow it back yourself to spend it, and then tax us for it.
Yep.
I mean, how in the world could anybody think that made sense?
I know if I had a printing press, I wouldn't need your money.
I wouldn't think so.
Oh.
And it just and you wouldn't need to borrow from me either, anybody else, would you?
That's for sure. Yeah, I'd never be broke either.
Well, of course not. In fact, it's an amazing thing because how could you be broke? How could you not have enough money if you printed it and spent it for everybody else to have? How could anybody have that money unless you printed it first?
That's right.
I mean, these are simple little things that I would think people would grasp in a minute, but
and
I just don't think I don't think they have the courage to actually get up and address the real root of the problem.
Well,
that's what I find.
I just didn't want to go to my grave and look back and just say, what in the heck was that all about anyway? Who pulled my strings? And I didn't know about it. I just don't want to be like that, an ignorant person. And I think there's a lot of people like that just want to know. But maybe that's just me.
After they want to know,
we'll find out.
They've got to want to do something. And, of course, I think I had a lawyer tell me, Byron, I don't want to know because now I can plead ignorance, and I don't want to know because then I couldn't plead ignorance.
Yep.
And I find that a lot of people, I explain this to people a lot, and, they see it, and they shrug their shoulders and go off, and that's it.
Yeah.
Because I don't think, well, what can I do? I mean, that's been pounded into them, that you can't do anything. Well, you can take a matchstick and break it pretty easy, but you put a whole box together in your hand and see if you can break that with just flipping through your fingers.
Right.
And see, that's the difference. And people have got to wake up, and we've got to address the real root problem. The root problem is our money's bad and controlled by a few who get everything for nothing, and everybody else is their slave. And if we're not willing to do that and address that issue, then we're never going to get anything done, no matter what.
Yep.
But you may have a way to start it, especially if you go and get your sheriffs and if you got any marshals in the area, get them to come in and observe and watch and hear. Because nothing else, you'll educate them firsthand.
And if there's anybody out there that says, well, I don't have any problems, all you got to do is go to the courtroom and sit there with a notepad and take notes. You'll find out that judge deserves to be indicted.
Oh, every time.
Yep. And that's what I did one time. They had lawyers looking at me. They were trying to stare through me to see what was on my piece of paper. They were so scared.
Nowadays in federal court, they won't even let you write on a piece of paper in there if you're just in there observing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I was in Minneapolis here one time, and I happened to have a press pass that nobody else did. Uh-huh. I was making notes, and other people started, and, man, they come right in there and took everything away, and I just slipped my press pass, and he left me alone. But every one of the rest of them took all that stuff away.
And another thing,
years ago they had a sheriff's jury where the sheriff was the judge and run the whole court system.
Yeah.
And that was the fairest thing I ever saw. And, of course, the neat thing about that, too, the jury was allowed to ask questions.
Well, see, that's the thing. People don't understand. You talk about a trial by jury. That's a trial by jury. Now, there's another thing called jury trial. That's not a trial by jury. There's a Rule 38, Rule 39. But ever since we've had these 1947, when everything became public policy, there's been we hardly have a grand jury in North Dakota. I don't think there's been one called. No, they don't call a grand jury here ever because the prosecutor says, well, we want to indict this guy. So they do. But here's the thing: the difference between a trial by jury and a jury trial. It's the same difference as the first day of spring and the first spring day.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the same thing,
mm-hmm.
and you'll never get a judge to consent to a trial by jury, because that means it's by the jury.
And the jury couldn't possibly do it unless they
trial.
asked some questions.
Well,
how could you honestly decide something if you didn't ask some questions to make sure you understood it?
Well,
you understood it and got the points out you wanted to hear.
Yep.
And that was the most amazing thing about that sheriff's jury, because the jury could ask questions of either one of the plaintiff or the defendant.
In a trial by jury, the jury does everything. They ask all the questions. The judge is nothing but a moderator.
Well, that's kind of the way it was with that sheriff's jury.
It's on the books, but it never happens because they won't allow it.
Well, no, because that takes away the power to control it.
Takes away their power.
The judge gets the decision he wants every time.
Mm-hmm.
And he's so smooth. I've watched him a lot. And they smile and sound so sincere about it, this and that. But I've seen him where they wouldn't even let the jury take notes.
Oh my. Huh.
Yeah, I've been in the courtroom when the jury wouldn't let the jury take notes.
Yeah. Well, I tell you one thing: if we could clean up our judicial system, the rest of the country would follow. Then we'd have a good money system. We'd have good. Everything.
Well, yeah, because you could take the money system to court and get it changed.
That's right.
But a long time ago, I've heard bankers say, and people say that this, a really good banking system won't work in this place or that place because they don't have a fully enough developed court system. And I could never understand what that meant until the last few years. And it's clear what it means. It's until you get the lawyers and the educated and the judges so bad that they'll never rule against the banks. Then you have a mature enough judicial system to actually have a working banking system. And it's clear once you're in there and watch these things. It's all about power. I mean, you can't say anything, you can't do anything, and they don't even follow law. We talked the other day about Ray Ehrman, and he was Ehrman down at he was originally from Freeman, and I was at one of his trials one time, and they had the witnesses sequestered, but after this one guy testified, he went and sat in the back room. And then they got Ray on the stand, and he said something, and the prosecutor jumped all over him. Then he called that guy up, and he testified that, well, you heard him say that. Was that right the way it was? And he said no. And so I said, object to that out loud. I was sitting in there, and of course the judge got mad and raked over me the coals, and of course Ray never did catch what had happened. And so then after the trial was over, the judge called me into his courtroom, or into his back, and he said he thought he was a little harsh on him, and I said, well, you should have stopped it right there. Hey, you knew that there was a witness requested, and that meant he could not have been in that courtroom to hear that testimony, and yet you allowed that to stand. I mean, what's wrong with you? Well, we can't do everything for these pro se's. Well, yeah, you can. You can at least make them follow the rules.
Yeah.
You can make the whole court follow the rules.
Yep.
And then, of course, we went through the money and everything else, and he could see it, but he wasn't doing anything about it. He said maybe if you get the right case, but you can't get the right case. If you try that, well, then you say you don't have jurisdiction, or I had one case that I ruled, and they said, well, you don't have, you're no different than everybody else. Everybody else does the same thing, so you can't show where you had any harm different than everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
So what we need is a class action where everybody that ever borrowed money could sue these banks all at one time.
The trouble is they won't allow a class action without a lawyer. And then you're screwed. That's
well, maybe and maybe not. I mean, you can, if you did it right, you could go into the last moment and say, well, the lawyer just not feeling well, I'll just have to proceed, because we don't have time to change another one. And he coughs and sputters a little bit, and
I got to do that.
I've done that. I got to represent a guy that way. Of course, when I got it going too much my way, then they threatened to throw me in jail for fraction law without a license, after they had granted me permission. I've had that happen to me twice.
Yeah, well, I don't think there is no law about that.
Wow.
There really can't be a law about that. If there is, it's a good subject for a grand jury.
Well, again, how can the judge have contempt of court where he's the one that makes the charge, he's the one that judges the charge, and he's the one that sentences you? I mean, how can that actually be legal? Well, I think I see, looking at my clock, I believe our time is up.
Okay.
I hope people enjoyed this, listening as much as I enjoyed doing it, and being with you and visiting with you. And
well, I so appreciate you, Byron. You're the old school. You're the guy that got these balls rolling, and we're kind of the next generation that's going to take it up and try to keep it going.
Well, I hope you learn and things work, and maybe we can do this again in a month or so. And I guess I'm going to be allowed to do this show once a week, and I've got to work on who to interview and obviously get better at it. I mean, this is my first attempt to ever do anything like that. I've been on a lot as guest, but never at the host. So I'm sure I have a lot of things to learn. But I'll thank you for the time, and I think we probably ought to get off the clock just like we're supposed to.
Okay.
And good night, everybody, and thanks so much for listening and joining here if you are. And if not, if you get it on the archives, I appreciate you coming and listening, and hope we've all learned a little bit, and thank you so much. Good night.